everyone. I am so sorry we are starting late. We had some technical difficulties on my end over at MVLS. So thank you so much for sticking out, waiting for us as we got rolling today. Again, my name is Heather Hyman. I am the Human Trafficking Prevention Project Manager over at Maryland Volunteers Lawyer Service. I'm Jessica Emerson, the Director of the Human Trafficking Prevention Project at University of Baltimore Law, will be joining shortly. She is down in Annapolis today. And we are so excited to be presenting yet another one of our quarterly webinars and to have such incredible guests as the two people that we have today. I'm so excited to welcome Sarah Dohoney Byrne and Laura Sammon here to talk about a critical issue for so many of the survivors and individuals that we are working with here in Maryland, and that is supporting survivors' financial success, and particularly how to address banking, credit, other consumer debt-related challenges. And I know they're here to offer just a wealth of information. I'm gonna let them introduce themselves. But before I hand it off, I did want to just quickly note, we are happy to answer questions in the chat throughout the entirety of the webinar. We will be sending out a PDF of the slides afterwards, and there will be a recording available on the HTPP website in case you have to go. And I'm glad to see Jess was able to join us. But with that, I want to hand it over to Sarah to properly introduce both of you who are doing such amazing work through the different financial stabilization projects that you're running.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Jess. Thank you to MVLS and the Human Trafficking Prevention Project. We have been partners with both of those organizations for many years in our shared work in supporting survivors. And so it's just a pleasure to be with this group today. I will introduce myself and my background, mostly because I understand there's a lot of attorneys on the call and those involved in financial inclusion. So I'm hoping that we can get in each other's Rolodex because we've just found a lot of success in having contacts across the country that support survivors. And I'll allow my very esteemed colleague from Wells Fargo introduce herself when she begins her portion of the part of the program. I'm hearing a little bit of an echo. I'm wondering if Heather or Jess, are you, okay, very good. There we go. So I am going to start, I'll tell you a little bit about my history, but then I really want to focus on what TRIAGE is. So I'm an attorney at a law firm called Moore Van Allen in Charlotte, North Carolina. We're a mid-sized full-service firm. And I developed the firm's human trafficking pro bono project in 2013. Like many of you on the call, once I learned about human trafficking, I was really interested in seeing if I could support survivors, having done a lot of pro bono work in other areas and focusing on gendered violence. Learning about human trafficking really inspired me to want to provide comprehensive legal services to victims. And I wanted to volunteer with a program much like the one that I'm involved in now, but realized it didn't exist. And talk about innovative work. I really had admired Jess's work with the Prevention Project, which predates our work here at the Pro Bono Project, because it really inspired a lot of particularly the vacatur and expunction work that we now do. So we built that program, and the way it's structured is we provide comprehensive legal services to victims. And those of you in this work probably know what that work looks like. There are vast and various legal needs that survivors have. So our primary area of service is expunction and vacatur work, no surprise there. The second area, and it's my personal area of focus, is victim witness representation for survivors who are either being questioned by law enforcement or prosecutors about their exploitation, or who would like to prompt an investigation of perpetrators. And we represent them through working with investigators and prosecutors from the very beginning, and if it proceeds to a prosecution, through to sentencing and even beyond sentencing, to make sure that their victim witness rights are protected through the whole process and ensuring that they are compensated through restitution. The third sort of area of the legal services bucket is what I just always describe as everything else. We do a lot of custody work for survivors. A number of our clients have either lost custodial or visitation rights of their children while they were being exploited. And so we help them understand what their rights are and ideally increase those rights and access to their children. We do a lot of T visas, name changes. we seem to be doing a lot of driver's license restoration. That seems to be trending over the last couple of years. And speaking of trending needs, this probably came to light for us over the last 2 years. We had been really focused on meeting all of the legal needs that our survivor clients had, but we kept hearing when we meet with all of our clients, of course, we try to find out what their goals are, whether or not they fit in a legal remedy box or not. We just try to ascertain what their goals are and see if our program can help them in any way. And we really started to realize that financial security, financial independence, helping clear up bad credit really became a priority, almost at the level of their legal needs. So there is a program here in Charlotte, North Carolina, what's called the Charlotte Triage Pro Bono Partnership. And it's a collaboration among several Fortune 500 companies and law firms who have come together to say, we want to support our legal aid corporations in the area to be able to increase capacity to meet the legal needs of survivors. So we've been involved in triage, but the reason I talk about triage now is because we here at Moore Van Allen started to learn that financial inclusion and financial security were just as important to our survivors as legal remedies and meeting their legal needs. We realized that we had to put some attention to this and see if we could plug in and help. So the good fortune of the fact that the triage partners, many of the corporations that make up the triage are financial institutions. And they include several banks and fintech and other organizations who had just a lot of employees that really wanted to support human trafficking victims, but may not be in the legal department or are lawyers, and probably felt like participation in the pro bono project wasn't a good fit. But now that we realized it was important to expand to non-legal support, including meeting the financial inclusion needs of our survivors, it was a perfect fit. And I could go on and on about Laura Sammon with Wells Fargo, who you'll hear from in a few minutes, but she really has led the charge and really innovated in this area of providing remedy to survivors in the form of credit restoration. So Triage in Charlotte, we now offer free legal services to survivors and also credit repair and other financial inclusion needs. Our volunteers also provide other forms of non-legal support like mentorship, resume writing, job searching, housing searching, and all of that. But for the purposes of today, we're going to focus on the financial inclusion piece. And before we get to the credit repair and tactically how that work is done, we want to touch just very briefly on access to banking. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody on the call is aware of the FAST initiative. So the FAST initiative, it stands for Finance Against Slavery and Trafficking. And it's a program that came out of the G7 conference, probably I think in 2018, which it was a call to member states to empower the financial institutions in all of those countries to basically do a better job of detecting human trafficking in the bank's financial flows, but then also in turn supporting survivors. So engaging in programming that would help survivors who've been exploited and to avoid re-victimization. So the FAST initiative from that developed what is called the Survivor Inclusion Initiative, which is a very specific program. The FAST program overall, I've put up on the slide kind of the 5 tenets of where they would like participating banks and other financial institutions to focus, which is, comply with anti-money laundering laws in order to better detect trafficking, knowing risks, maybe in a bank's supply chain or other commercial lending relationships to mitigate those risks. So where they've identified a risk, to take steps to mitigate it. And invest in prevention in communities, microfinance, other ways so that we can avoid victimization before it even begins. And then this last piece that I'm going to talk for a few minutes about today is the Survivor Inclusion Initiative. And you'll see on the slides I've listed, that's not an exhaustive list, but of some participating banks that have signed on and have agreed to engage in the Survivor Inclusion Initiative. And what that is it is a program through which survivors of human trafficking can access basic financial products and services without the usual barriers that they might meet. And those of you that work with survivors know that those barriers are significant, whether it's having the requisite identification to open a bank account, having a minimum, enough money for a minimum balance requirement, just the challenges with going into a bank and working with bank personnel in order to, explain your needs and circumstances. So the idea is to connect survivors to banks without those barriers, all to the end of financial security and financial independence to avoid re-victimization, but also that victims of this crime can begin not just to survive and not just be survivors, but to build wealth, build financial security to protect themselves and their families. So how does it work? And I'm touting it a little bit because if there's anybody on the call that's interested in becoming a service provider that can refer survivors to banks, I'd love it if you reach out to me after today's program, and I'm happy to make that connection. So it's
and Sarah, I just want to interrupt and say I'm so glad that you said that.
Good. I'm doing a bit of recruiting.
Because I've been saying over and over again that this is a grant waiting to be written. And so I really do hope that the folks who are listening, if this is something that you think you can incorporate into your organization, there's a question regardless of the state. So, I mean, yes. I know we need this in Maryland. So, I mean, I am personally pleading to Maryland organizations, but I think the answer is yes, correct?
Yes, this is a global program.
Right.
So on the slide, almost 2,000 accounts have already been opened. But we're really, particularly in the United States, we're really trying to increase survivor support organization referrals to banks. Because I work very closely with the banks, at least, the banks here in Charlotte, and they're very enthusiastic about participating in this program, but they need service providers to identify survivors that can participate. So Jess, do you want me to keep going or did you have one?
Could I ask a quick question? I just see a lot of chat going on about, how do you access this program? Is it something where you have to set up a whole new program at your organization or in the community, or is this something where you just become that participating survivor service organization? Like you get a training, you get certified, and then you can start making those referrals.
I'm thinking about like program. Address confidentiality. Like we didn't have to set up a whole new program, but both MVLS and the HTPP are address confidentiality liaison. So I think kind of clarifying that would be important. And then there's a question about grant language. So I think anyone who is looking to kind of put pen to paper on this should definitely contact Sarah and Laura for some more information. But some guidance around that would be great.
Absolutely. And if we get anything out of today, just find out my email address or phone number at the end. And I'd love to talk with you about that because the FAST initiative is embarking on a review of the program to try to increase participation and improve it. So that the timing is really right to get involved. And to answer Heather's question, just like we want it to be barrier-free for survivors to access banking products, we want it to be virtually barrier-free for both banks and service providers to engage in it as well. So the only requirement is there's a basis of participation. It's not even an MOU, but it comes out of the United Nations University administers this program. And so I will connect you with the personnel there and they'll provide you the basis of participation for engagement in this program, which I'm certain all of you will find very easy to comply with. So it really is barrier-free all around. Now I'll tell you, not the challenge, but a lot of the hard work is the bank side of the work, making sure that the banks understand their regulatory permissions on what they can allow when they're opening a bank account that they might otherwise think would be required. But for this particular program, it's not going to be required, and that's okay from a regulatory perspective. So I'm so glad about the enthusiasm about that. As Laura knows, because Laura's with Wells Fargo and they're a participating bank, and so we've had lots of experiences with referring survivors. Every bank is different with what they need to advance the referral. And some banks need a letter, I guess we'll just call it a victim attestation letter, and it can come from a service provider that says, I'm working with this survivor who would like access to banking. And it can be that. Sometimes there's a requirement for a law enforcement victim certification. I actually don't see that very much anymore, so that's good news. But again, it is bank dependent because each bank has the discretion to run the program as they see fit for their purposes. I just have one quick slide on financial literacy, because whenever we talk about financial inclusion, I've come to learn that that's a really important part of this. We can empower survivors with access to financial services, ideally barrier-free, and we can support them in their legal needs. But what has to go part and parcel with that is an offer to help close any education gaps about how to manage a bank account and credit, and what can help and what can hurt credit. So we've seen a lot of the financial institutions really taking an interest in wanting to advance financial literacy, and not just for trafficking survivors, but a lot of the banks now have financial inclusion officers that have departments that are tasked with working with all populations to make sure that they can have a successful banking experience, just based on some basic education that they may not have gotten before. And I've also, just yesterday I was on a call with a service provider. It's about financial literacy. It seems like a lot of service providers and case managers are putting financial literacy further at the top when they triage the needs that a survivor might have. So that's really good news. And I just threw up a slide from Bank of America for some of their.
I think that's really crucial, because it affects not just, like you said, not just survivors of trafficking. I mean, in the greater scheme of things, low-income communities and communities of color are vastly underbanked. And as a result of that, they're already low income generating jobs, et cetera, are subject to so many fees and fines and all of this stuff. So this is a huge issue. I look at it as a huge prevention issue, right? Yeah. Because when we don't have control over our own finances, or when we don't have access to financial stability and independence, that is the door is open for an exploiter to try to fill that need.
That's right. This is exploitation prevention as much as it is a recovery program, for sure. Great point. So I definitely want to turn it over to Laura, because she's the real expert on the call, but I really explain to you the triage piece, because Laura and I, when we talk to groups, we really want to inspire similar, other groups don't have to model this after ours, but the public-private collaboration here in Charlotte, in my mind, is the only reason we've been able to support so many survivors. And we have, our program has, I think, about 250 volunteers who are lawyers at law firms, paralegals at law firms, in-house lawyers at banks, financial investigations professionals at banks. It's a really diverse volunteer pool, and the collaboration, honestly, among organizations that are often competitive with each other, whether it's law firms or banks, have really come together to support survivors in this space. So we just hope, I'm sure the other collaborations like this exist across the country, but we always like to share the good news of how we've had some success here in Charlotte because we've come together to address this problem. So I'm turning it over to Laura, who will introduce herself and really get down to the nit and gritty of credit repair.
All right.
And
Sarah,
just to be clear, we had everyone's intros, but our technological problems took that time away from us. So sorry about that, ladies.
And Sarah always builds me up so much. She makes me so nervous right before I start talking. So my name is Laura Sammon. I have worked with Wells Fargo for 25 years, the last 13 in financial crimes. So we see the business side of financial crimes, and that's a thing to understand. It is a business. Human trafficking is a business at its core. So the money and being able to track that money and to look and identify victims of trafficking, or even the monies that were made using that particular person. There's some really good investigative techniques that we have worked with law enforcement to try to ensure that, if we do get a case, there might be restitution involved, and there might be actual funds that we could go after for this individual based on the amount of money they made on this particular victim. So just things to keep in the back of your mind. There's a lot of different caveats or a lot of different aspects of financial crimes and human trafficking that you can get interested in and find out more information in. So we're going to talk about credit restoration. As Sarah mentioned, the need for being banked after you are a survivor and out is challenging, because when it's good to have the human trafficking understanding and the trauma-informed education of how traffickers control their victims. So a lot of that is by use of money, either restricting them or taking it or whatever it may be. But they also, it's a control factor. So they're going to exploit that person to every possibility, physically, and also, if they have credit, they're going to try and take that credit and just use that. They're just going to try to exploit in every possible fashion. So what we do is we meet with the survivor and we speak about, what's your goals? What are you worried about? What do you know? Sometimes when we're talking about credit, we need to understand how in depth and how long the victimization has gone on, because we need to kind of paint that picture so that we can take this to the individual credit services and try to work with them. So what we do is we get the request in from a victim. We will then ask to set up a meeting with the victim and the advocate so that we can discuss what their most pressing items are, what they're worried about, and then we'll start taking a look at their credit. We'll require that they pull a credit report. And then we also want to make sure that when we are speaking, the volunteer is speaking, we're speaking on behalf of the pro bono project, because we don't want to get any kind of influence, Wells Fargo, legal issues in that respect. So we want to make sure that we're speaking to the creditors and taking a look at what's going on and trying to work these items out based on our volunteer positions that we're currently in. So once we get the information on the credit report, we'll go down through it. And this is really important. So as you're building this, it's a work in progress. We learn something new every time we do this. So as we're working with the survivor, we want to make sure that they understand some of the tools that are out there to protect them from this point forward. So as you see on this screen, and Sarah's trying to keep up my rambling, thank you. You can put security freezes, which actually stops any availability to do soft touches or soft pull of your credit, or from anybody else to try and use your credit. And then also there's an ID theft feature that will flag you or let you know that there's been a hit on your credit. Either someone's reviewing it, someone is trying to add to your credit, whatever it may be. So these are things that are preventative that you can read on a website, right in the 3 credit bureaus. They have all the processes, very easy process, but I always recommend it going forward because it kind of puts a line in the sand of okay, I'm going to start taking control of my credit again. We look at credit reports, and then when you're going through the credit report, you want the advocate there because it's a basic journey again back into the exploitation. So you talk through each of the individual things. The survivor may remember exactly what that is. Survivor may not be aware of any of the items that are on, or some new items, that have showed up on their credit report because it's been done completely by fraud or whatever, ID theft. But there are some things, and just for an example, I will give you joint accounts. One of the traffickers that we've dealt with typically paired up his victims so that they would be on a credit, a car, say, together. So that way they knew they've got a joint account on this car. If one of those individuals decides they want to try to leave the group, they know that the person that they've been matched with now has to work double hard to pay off that debt. It's a control thing. So that's what we wanted. That's when we start talking about the ins and outs of the credit, it can be very traumatic and triggering for the individual. So it's always good to have the advocate there. And so when you walk down into, each of the credit review, if you see, visual, just anxiety or whatever, take the time to step back and say, okay, we'll come back to that. We have a couple things here. We'll start working on those. We'll meet again, type thing. So as you get more familiar with credit, there are specific things that have more weight than others. There's specific things that have more individuals that are survivors that are going after their education, we want to support that every way possible. If they have an account that is an old student loan, we want to try to address that right away, so we clear that roadblock and we get them into their college and get them, further in their education. So there's a lot of different things you want to learn. There's going to be typically we see a lot of medical bills because of the nature of human trafficking and the physical threats and violence that comes along with it. So, you need to understand those. Many times we can get those. Those are pretty clear cut. This is a direct result of the victimization. We can get those pretty cleared, or at least we can talk to the individual and get it reduced to a sizable chunk. Or if there's victim programs, there's a lot of different things. It really is about taking a look at the credit report and then trying to kind of map out your plan of attack of how you want to get the low hanging fruit, and then the other battles that you're going to have a little bit more information. And I say battles just because collectors want their money, and until they understand the nature of where that credit came from, their tone definitely changes some after we start talking with them. So as we mentioned, the victim verification letter is extremely important. Without that, we have no basis to say from this date to this date. Anything that falls within that date is definitely a result of the victimization. So we've had Homeland Security, we've had the different survivor organizations provide those, lawyers have provided those. They're very, they don't have to be too in-depth, they just have to give some basic information. Things we're seeing more often is the power of attorney request, which is a very limited power of attorney. Everybody gets that, like, oh my God, I'm gonna be a power of attorney, but it's actually a very limited, very useful tool, very powerful tool to help you talk to the creditors and start working with them. Okay. So
Laura, could I just jump in for a second? So here in Maryland, I just wanted to add, because we do a fair amount of credit assistance here at MVLS, and as part of the HTPP, we try to always see if individuals we're assisting have any credit issues or debt they need to look at. And in Maryland too, we access what's called Maryland Judiciary Case Search to look up people's criminal records. And that also is a place where if debt collectors have gone to court to try to collect, we can often get a lot of information about the debt that somebody may owe through this database. And so I just want to be sure that providers know that, it's not just a place to look for criminal records. It can be a place to get not a full picture, but at least some picture of some of the client's debt, if there's any active, actions to collect going on. And there's things that we can do to help to intervene at the court, level, or just to explain what it shows. Like, was this attempt dismissed? Has the date that something was eligible for collection, has the judgment, has a date passed by which a creditor can collect? There's a lot of analysis we can do to help people understand their finances.
That's excellent. Excellent. Thank you for adding that.
It's also frustrating though, because then the public can go and look somebody's name up and see this easily. It's pros and cons to it.
There are, and safety is a concern with this. When we begin working with collections, we just imagine, put yourself in the shoes. I'm sure you all work with, survivors, to have to answer to some of these questions. And I had bad credit just because I was a reckless teenager and I had bad credit. But when I went to get a car, I felt this big when they're asking me questions about my credit. And I, have not suffered the trauma of any, of a victim in this capacity. So, it's very nerve-wracking to sit on that side and answer the questions. And even with the banking piece as well, things that banks look at are your permanent address, how long you've been there. Well, if you're a survivor, you're getting moved around a lot because of the different areas that can house you, or, wherever you are in your journey at that point. Do you have a paycheck that's coming to you from an ACH, which is an electronic direct deposit? Well, no, they don't have these kind of jobs, kind of thing. And even once a relationship, if your trafficker has used your individual account, there are relationship building behind the scenes that happen within financial centers. So you will always be linked with that. And if that individual has been flagged as a bad actor, you know, a trafficker, an anti-money launderer, whatever it may be, then your name is always associated with that. So we try to break that bond so that we don't have that and they are able to get an account. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that happens from a financial crimes perspective that keeps us out of, you know, regulatory problems, but it builds relationships based on very high level, basic visual things, but you really have to get into the meat of that to kind of try to remove those blockers and those boundaries so that they can get an account and also the credit repaired. Okay, so when we're talking to the collections and creditors, whenever we send correspondence back and forth, you can do this from your personal email. I do it from my work email. I've got permission from my manager and individuals that know I'm a volunteer. Always encrypt that email. And even if you're sending faxes, we do have some people that would rather have faxes. You know, just say, I'm sending this fax now. Please go to the fax machine, pick it up. We want the minimal amount of eyes on it. There's not a lot of information on there, but it's still personal information. And you know, we want to try to keep this as safe and comfortable for the individual that's going through the process. When we try to remove something or we do have a positive experience, they start getting emails from either Equifax or one of the credit bureaus, you know, just let them know that that's going to happen. And then that's not always a bad thing. Just kind of take a look at what it is. And then once you have worked through the full amount of items that you believe are, you know, workable and can be reduced, then you wait another 30 days and you pull another credit report to see how things are rolling off or see what it looks like on that. So it comes a bit of a long process, but it's a very, you know, back and forth and just, you know, getting in there and doing the calls kind of thing. So do we have another slide that we have? I can't remember what you added, Sarah. Okay, so these are the ones that Sarah and I are going to do. So we have issues, or not issues, there's different things that may not show up always on the credit report. So again, I'm going to go with the car scenario. So that the individual uses the two social security numbers of his victims, gets his car and tells him right from the start, you know, that it's going to be insured, and gets the insurance for the right at the face value there to get the car. They get the car and then they stop paying on insurance because, you know, who cares, because the insurance is in the victim's names. They no longer pay it. That's going to be a problem when they go back, and that may not show up on a credit report. So we need to be better at understanding some of the things that go along with credit and try to ensure that we can look at those pieces. Another part is rent, back rent, and that type of thing. It's not always included. It's not a mortgage, so it's not going to show up on your credit report. So we want to try to work with and find out, you know, kind of paint me a picture of how you were moved, if you were moved when you were victimized, and where might there be some things we need to clean up. So it's just a matter of going back through and trying to identify all these things. Sarah,
I was going to say, we thought to include that because I've had a number of clients who said, oh, everything on my credit report is, well, a lot of it's not accurate, but it's kind of the bad stuff. Where's all the good stuff where I'm very prompt with payment? And it's really frustrating because we don't have control about what's reported. So one option that the FCPB, their documents offer, is get a letter from a creditor that, you know, you've had a good experience with, and you can use that letter when you're trying to get other, that doesn't really help with the restoration phase, but if you're trying to access other credit, maybe a letter from a landlord that says you've always had prompt payment could be helpful when you're trying to access other credit.
There was a question about accessing credit reports and paying fees. And I saw that you had the website up for the free annual credit report that's from the federal government on one of your prior slides. So I just wanted to be sure people saw that. And
yes.
Do you know, is it still, because I know during the pandemic, it's been free weekly access to credit reports. Is that still ongoing?
That I don't know weekly, but I know you do get one free credit report from all your credit bureaus once a year. I know they've changed that. So there are plenty, even Credit Karma you can pull, and it doesn't do any negative impact. It just shows you a varied information. It's not, may not be a full credit report like you would get from one of the credit bureaus.
Yeah, I think.
Well, I was just going to say, I believe if you put a credit freeze or alert, Laura, is it possible you might have unlimited access to reports? I think you've reported fraud. It's
definitely, you have to read they change it quite often. So I don't want to step on, give you the wrong information, but basically they will tell you right on the basic front page of their website, the 3 credit bureaus. So just kind of go by those guidelines. Freecreditreport.com is absolutely free, doesn't have any negative effect on it. Even sometimes if you go into a financial institution, they can also pull credit reports without any penalties as well. And they will provide you a copy of that also. So
I just, sorry, keep going.
Laura, I think, I keep focusing on wanting to reproduce this in Maryland. I'm just thinking it sounds a lot like, our kind of hunting and gathering for criminal records, and we have to include money in our funding, or we have included money in our request for funding to pay for access to fingerprinting. And it seems like maybe anyone who's looking to reproduce a program like this might want to include some money for accessing various types of reports and court filings and things of that nature.
Another really good money. Yeah. So Sarah uses something called LexisNexis. It's the, end all be all data digger is what I think of it as. But when you're trying to clean up your addresses and names and associations with yourself, that's a good place to go and be able to look. I had one individual that was a survivor that I was working with that had a direct connection in. No matter what I Googled, and just Google your name, you'll see who you're connected with. And you're like, what? Was always directly connected with her trafficker because they had lived together. So I was always worried that when I was starting to work on some of these things, that it would notify that individual as well and give him some indication that, something's going on and kind of put the victim back on the radar, which scares me. So, trying to clean up that information also is something that you may want to, that's a licensing, I believe, Sarah, if I'm not mistaken, licenses that you need to pay for. But LexisNexis is a good area to look at yourself and see what your footprint looks like on the internet, and then also clean those relationships up.
And it feels like I'm sorry. It feels like we should push just remembering that Maryland has an address confidentiality program, which can keep folks safe. There's also a tool that I can send out just in terms of like general internet searches. It takes a while, but you can go site to site and actually request removal of certain information. I know we're kind of blurring the line between the personal information sites plus the financial stuff. But there are ways to do it. So if folks are in need of that, I can send it, or we can make sure it gets sent out with whatever MVLS sends out for this webinar.
So in your credit report, it'll list the known addresses that you're associated with and some names that you're associated with. Right. So that's a starting point. That's what kind of clued us into, okay, we've got some relationship issues, and how is it being built, and what is it key on? So you could go down so many different rabbit holes, and Sarah pulls me out of them all the time because I just go.
We have a similar host.
Laura, I was just going to say that's another benefit of collaborating with private law firms is perhaps volunteers that are with legal aid or nonprofit corporations can partner with law firms and use the LexisNexis and have an attorney or legal professional partnered with a volunteer from another organization.
That's what I was just going to say is we have access to Lexis and we use that for researching people. It's kind of, again, it's like a hybrid approach that we use now between K-Search, between Lexis, and then I always use annualcreditreport.com to get the credit reports for our clients because it's free and it doesn't impact credit. And I did just check, they are still doing the free weekly access, which is great because of COVID. So that's huge because you can try to correct something, go back, not have to pay a fee for that second or third pull of your credit history. So yeah, we're lucky we have those things. It's funny, even I was thinking about what you said about the rent not reflecting on a credit report. Like that's where I often see that when I go to Maryland Judiciary case search, because it's the landlord suing the individual we're working with for rent, and that case is listed on case search. So again, you have to hop to so many places, and it can be really intimidating for someone to try to do on their own. So
and you don't even realize that, you know, I worked with a survivor that was like, why isn't my rent showing up there? And I said, it is a credit report. She's like, oh, it's not credit. I'm like, yeah. So, you know, it's so along with when you're setting up this program, it's always good to try and get someone that might have some financial, any kind of mentoring that can go along with it, because I learned at a very young age, when I applied for a loan for my house, they were going to give me so much money. I was so excited. And then my friend stopped me and said, but can you afford that? They'll give you anything that you ask, you know, in a sense, but can you afford it? So what you actually get approved for and then what you're able to afford is much different. So you don't always think that when people are giving you money, creditors and whatnot, that they've taken out into consideration all of your ins and outs of your finances. They'll give you a certain amount and then they expect you to pay that back. So just make sure you can afford that. That's just lessons that you have to learn in a normal, you know, going through life kind of thing. But having someone that will mentor an individual also is very helpful.
We added the last couple of bullets just more to highlight the fact that there is sort of an art rather than a science to this. When, you know, Laura in the beginning said it's most important to understand the goals of the survivor that you're working for. So with that in mind, and she'd mentioned low hanging fruit, what should we try to clear up first? You really have to think about strategy. And part of that strategy is, what are some accounts that are going to roll off your credit report within a certain period of time? And, you know, when in our reading about this, I see a lot of reference to don't poke the bear or wake the dragon, because you might not win. Maybe even just making a well-intentioned call to a creditor might start the tolling again. So you just kind of have to think strategically about that.
Yes, we don't have this all figured out. This is definitely a learning progress, but yeah, we try to do what we can.
I wanted also to disclaim, and we've actually gotten a couple of referrals from Maryland for consumer law advice responding to collections lawsuits. So what we're talking about today is access to banking and also repairing bad credit. And then of course, there's a whole other world of building good credit, which is where I hope we're going to start talking more about. But I just did want a disclaimer that most of what we're talking about today is not how to respond to, you know, a collections debt lawsuit. That would certainly require legal advice, and the bar for doing this work is really growing. And I think there's a lot of you actually in Maryland that do this work, which is excellent. So I just wanted to make sure that the group knew that this is, when you get the credit report, how to attack strategically based on the survivor's goals of how to clean up, either forgive, reduce, or set up a payment plan for those debts, not how to respond to a debt collection lawsuit. So I was remiss in not mentioning two things, and I think we still have a few minutes, and I also want Laura, because I just love hearing Laura talk, and the way that she's brought together the, you know, financial crimes investigative piece to credit repair, I think makes her just so unique in her work. And both of them, the victim work informs the AML work, and the AML work certainly informs her support of survivors. So I think she's a wonderful unicorn, and I replicate her. And I know I keep hearing Jess saying, let's try to do something similar to this, you know, in other parts of the country. Yeah. In Maryland, I really encourage the group to identify financial services firms, even small financial services practices, to engage in this work together, to have a collaboration. Because, you know, Laura will say, oh, I can work with this creditor all day long, but can you drop a power of attorney? So it's a really nice complement, these two disciplines, to work together. So what
we need to find a local Laura. That is very clear to us, right? So that's the natural partner for this project, right? Like a local person, and we might need your help identifying that person or training that person. You know, if you have Wells Fargo, obviously you work there. Let's find somebody here in the Baltimore or, you know, DC metro area that can spearhead this. Yep. That's kind of clear what we need.
Yes, and 100% available for that.
This group, because of sort of the makeup, there's a lot of lawyers on the call. Many of you may have heard about this, but we cannot have this program without mentioning the fact that the Debt Bondage Repair Act passed. The Debt Bondage Repair Act was a standalone bill that got folded into the National Defense Authorization Act of 2022, and it was signed by Biden at the end of December. And that is a piece of legislation that is requiring CFPB to make a rule that will require the 3 credit reporting agencies to establish a process whereby survivors of trafficking can go to the CRA to dispute an account on the basis that it was the result of being trafficked. So, you know, talking with Jess and I just can't believe how much this work mirrors our criminal records expunction work, but it really does. Again, the onus is on the survivor to have to prove, which is regrettable, but nonetheless, there's now going to be a process that you go straight to the CRA and you show documentation, either from a court or state agency, to establish the nexus between the trafficking and the account. And then they're obligated to erase it wholly from any of the reporting, which will then affect the scores. We don't know how this is going to impact this work. I'm hopeful that, you know, it will give us kind of 2 avenues. You know, Laura and her wonderful volunteers will continue to hit, you know, the creditors, lenders, servicers, and collectors for each of those underlying accounts. But then we can also go to the CRAs and dispute them if they're showing up on a report. So that's wonderful legislative news that's passed. And we hope we get the same for federal criminal records, you know, sometime in the near future. But anyway, we can't
one day
about this without talking about the Debt Bondage Repair Act.
Sarah, actually, I'm just going to interrupt everyone. I have to run. We are actually delivering testimony on the Safe Harbor Bill, working to protect minor survivors from criminalization. So I actually have to go take care of that. But I know that there's a lot of interest and a lot of questions, and I just want to encourage everyone that if you can't stay on, we are recording this. And, you know, I encourage everyone to stay on and ask questions and all of that. But I just didn't want to just disappear out of nowhere. So we just want to thank you both. Thanks to Heather and MVLS for always hosting these wonderful webinars, and wish me luck.
Yes, good luck.
Good luck,
Laura,
Jess.
was there anything else you wanted to say about the process or best practices?
So yeah, when we're looking at, there's a lot of different things you'll come across. Sometimes a survivor wants to get a new Social Security number, okay, completely because they can't deal with it. That's a process, and there are pluses and minuses, pros and cons to that as well. If you do get a new name or a new Social Security number, then you have no credit and you're starting over, and which is also a struggle. So there's pros to cons, and we have some of those just documents that shows some of the what's real, what's not, what good does it do, what harm does it do. We're showing here Survivor Guide to Money. This is actually a book. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to introduce it, but this is written from a perspective. Megan is a survivor of human trafficking, and it really puts into perspective how money has always been used against or as a control, and something that has been a tool and it has been used against them. And she turns it around into some really good lessons of how to use it in their favor and to, begin to be more comfortable with money and feeling more secure with the money. It's a good read and understanding of how a victim may be triggered by different questions, or even just, the whole idea of having, okay, I have money, and what I used to have to do with it in the past is no longer that, and I can relax and figure out what I need to do with it.
That's great. Yeah, Megan she heads up the Avery Center, which is a really reputable national nonprofit that's survivor-led and really focuses on this financial inclusion stuff. And her book I like to give to some of my clients, and one of them said, this is so well done, because in my client's experience, she said kind of what Laura had said, is she always thought of money as a sword, and now money can be a shield. It really took many years to kind of shift in her head that money can be a good thing and can, build security.
So it's out on Amazon. Good read if you can get a hold of it.
Another thing to include funding for any programs that are starting to think about.
It comes with the facilitator guide as well. So yeah.
That's wonderful.
Good.
Heather, there may be questions, and I'll stay on as long as the group would like. I don't know about Laura, but I am going to make one little shameless plug because of how I call. So for those of you that don't know, there's a group called the National Survivor Law Collective, which is a national network of lawyers who are wholly dedicated to providing trauma-informed legal representation to survivors. And we came together to form this network because up until this happened, it was sort of the justices of the world. We would all email each other when we had a client that had a legal need in a different geographic area. And then we've identified there's, of course, so many legal deserts across the country. So we're trying to build the network by providing trauma-informed legal representation and connecting each other. So we now have a listserv. If anybody, please email me if you'd be interested in getting on the listserv so that when you're working with a survivor that has a need in a different geographic area, you can more efficiently find a trauma-informed lawyer. And then the inverse, it could be a source of referral for you in your area too. So that's the Survivor Law Collective.
And we are, MVLS and the HTPP are members, and it is just an incredible resource to be able to reach out, because so many of the survivors we work with do have needs in multiple states, and that can be really hard to just blindly reach out. So this is an incredible resource. And I love seeing just the emails going on about like what's happening, what problems different practitioners are facing. The listers serve as a great point for education too, as well as connection. So, all right. I don't see any more questions in the chat. I think Linda was asking about the Survivor Law Collective. Yeah, it is focused on anti-trafficking work. It's not just general.
It is, and it's attorneys. It's not all service providers. We wanted to keep really focused and manageable, so it wasn't another listserv where we're inundated. But it's just, and you'll see it's very discreet. Does anyone have know an attorney in Pocatello, Idaho that you work? Very specific.
And it's great because you can ask about both a particular issue area. I need help with expungements, in San Diego, California, or whatever it is. Like you can try to find people, which is really useful. So, and we're again happy to be an access point to that too. If anyone has any clients with legal needs that might be outside of here. So. Well, I can't thank you enough. This was such an incredibly informative presentation. And again, this is something that we are looking forward to tackling even more in depth here in Maryland. Like Jess said, Laura, we got to find another Laura here in the Baltimore area that we can partnership. Because what really impressed me too, as we were talking about these different initiatives and projects and the approach that you have, it does really seem like there's this incredible public-private, legal financial partnerships that are creating a synergy that's really letting this reach its fullest potential down in Charlotte. And I think we could have something like that. And we have a need for something like that here in Maryland as well. So, all right. Well, thank you so much. We so appreciate your expertise. To everyone that's watching the webinar, as you know, per our routine, these will all be posted on the Human Trafficking Prevention Project's website, which is available at www.mvlslaw.org/HT. I will also be following up, sending out a PDF of the presentation and being sure that you have Sarah and Laura's contact information. You can follow up with any questions. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you next quarter. And thank you again for joining us.
Thanks,
everybody. Be well.
Bye-bye.